Hello, I'm Kesslin. My half-sister called me the strongest orphan she knew, right there in front of everyone at her wedding. They smiled, I stayed silent. But silence doesn't mean you don't feel every cut. They erased my mother, rewrote our past, and used my own money to celebrate it. What would you do if the people who owed you love gave you a spotlight just to humiliate you? Would you stay? Or would you do what I did and cancel everything? I stood in the entryway of the house I used to call home, the scent of lemon cleaner hitting my nose like a memory I didn't want to relive. The air was too still, too staged, like everything had been scrubbed clean of the years I lived here. I hadn't been back to Savannah in over a decade, and certainly not to this house. But here I was, 3 weeks before Mallory's wedding, pretending like I belonged. I'd barely set down my suitcase when I noticed it. The photo wall above the fireplace, once cluttered with school pictures, family vacations, and a single portrait of my mother, was now curated to perfection. Centered where my mother's photo used to be was a blown-up image of my father and Charla, all decked out in pastel pinks at their vow renewal ceremony. There was no trace of Lorna, no wedding photo, no snapshots of her holding me in her arms on the porch swing. Nothing. I stared at it longer than I should have. Charla had the wall redone for the rehearsal dinner, Mallory said, as she breezed past me, arms full of peony samples and a clipboard. It's all about aesthetics. Of course it was. No one said a word about the change. No one acted like it was strange. To them, that space had always belonged to Charla. My mother? A technicality, a smudge on the frame. That night, as I unpacked the few things I brought, I left the closet door open. It still smelled like cedar, and faintly of my mother's old perfume. I lay down, but didn't sleep. I just stared at the ceiling fan spinning slow and steady, trying to slow my thoughts to match. The next morning, I came downstairs early. Habit, I guess. I was always the first one awake growing up. Being early meant avoiding small talk and navigating tension in silence. Charla was already at the stove, flipping pancakes with the same precision she used to slice me out of the narrative. You always were an early riser, she said, not turning around. Just like your father. I nodded, unsure what to say. We weren't built for casual conversation. You know, she continued, we tried to give you everything after your mother passed. It wasn't easy for any of us. I didn't respond. I wanted to say, no, you gave Mallory everything. I got what was left, but instead, I poured coffee and sat at the end of the table. The truth, my father had married Charla first. Mallory was their child. But when they divorced and he met my mom, things changed. For a while. He remarried, had me, and for a brief moment, we were a family. Until I turned 9 and Mom got sick. When she died, they didn't even let me miss school for the funeral. I came home to find our family photos boxed up in the garage, labeled MISC. A year later, Charla was back in the house, wearing beige and smiling like the years in between never happened. They called it a fresh start. To them, I was a reminder of the years they'd rather forget. Later that afternoon, we were gathered in the dining room discussing seating arrangements. I offered a small suggestion, one I knew I'd regret bringing up the second it left my mouth. I was thinking maybe we could put a small photo of Mom on the memory table, I said. You know, just one, for tradition. There was a pause, the kind that feels like a slap. I think we should keep things current, Charla replied. It's Mallory's day, after all. Mallory didn't even look up from her phone. My father just shifted in his seat, avoiding eye contact. And that was that. I didn't argue. But this time, I didn't let it go either. I logged it, noted it deep inside. Like a tally mark on a chalkboard no one else could see. Strike one. That evening, I wandered the hallway again, unable to stop myself from facing that wall. The blank space where my mother's photo used to hang called to me like a wound you keep pressing, just to make sure it still hurts. It did. By the time I went back upstairs, the silence of the hallway was too loud. It rang in my ears louder than any insult. I left my shoes by the door, tugged my cardigan tighter around me, and crawled into bed with a tightness in my chest I hadn't felt in years. I didn't cry. Not because I wasn't hurt, but because I'd done that already, for years. I'd run out of tears. What I had now was awareness and maybe a little anger. 2 weeks out from the wedding, Mallory texted me out of the blue. Dress fittings at noon. Thought you might want to watch. She didn't say help, didn't ask me to come, just watch, like I was some extra on a film set of her life. I didn't respond. I just showed up. The bridal studio was full of ivory lace, glassy chandeliers, and women pretending to whisper while watching each other's reflections. I pushed through a curtain and stopped cold. Mallory stood on the fitting pedestal, smiling into the mirror, surrounded by layers of white satin. But not just any dress. It was my mother's wedding dress. My breath hitched, but I didn't let it show, at least not outwardly. The hem had been chopped, the neckline altered into something sharp and trendy, and the delicate lace my mom once told me came from her grandmother's sewing kit was gone. Completely gone. Mallory caught my reflection in the mirror and lit up. "Oh, good! You're here!" I took a step forward, my hands curling into fists in the pockets of my coat. "I thought you'd like to see it," she said, spinning slowly. "It needed a modern touch. I know Mom left it for you, but it just fits me better." She said Mom like it belonged to both of us, like that woman raised her. Charla stood nearby, sipping a flute of lemon water, her hand resting gently on Mallory's shoulder. "It's a lovely sentiment, Kesslin," she added with a sugar-sweet tone. "I'm sure you'll wear something equally meaningful." Equally meaningful. I bit the inside of my cheek and forced a smile that didn't reach my eyes. Mallory twirled again, beaming. "The tailor said it was almost like it was made for me." It wasn't made for her. It was worn by my mother, stored away for me. And now, it looked like it belonged to someone who'd never even said her name aloud. "I'm not sure what I'll wear yet," I said finally. "Well," Mallory grinned, "don't wait too long. People might think you're not planning to come." I turned away before they could see what was in my eyes. Later that night, I found myself in the attic, sitting cross-legged in front of the old keepsake chest my mother left behind. I hadn't opened it in years. My fingers traced the lid before I lifted it. Inside, yellowed letters, old photos, and the small velvet box that used to house her gold locket. The box was empty. I blinked, checked beneath the silk lining, shuffled through the envelopes. Gone. The next morning, during the rehearsal walkthrough at the church, I spotted Mallory at the altar in her rehearsal outfit, cool and composed. Hanging delicately around her neck was the locket, my mother's locket. When I approached, she saw me looking. "Oh, this?" she said casually, touching it. "I borrowed it. It felt right. You're not the only one who misses her, you know." I didn't respond, didn't flinch. I just stared at her for a long moment. Then I remembered something my mother once told me. A quiet piece of wisdom whispered to me as a child curled beside her in bed after another exhausting day. "Sometimes silence is the strongest shield. Don't waste your breath where it won't be heard." So I breathed, deeply, and walked away. That night, back in the room I once wallpapered with magazine clippings and dreams of being anywhere else, I laid my outfit for the wedding across the bed. It was simple, black, clean lines, unapologetically plain. I opened my suitcase and nestled the empty velvet box into one of the side compartments. I stared at it for a long time. It wasn't about the necklace. It was never about the dress. It was about the way they took pieces of her and gave them to Mallory like they were heirlooms she'd earned, as if existence was inheritance. I zipped the suitcase slowly, and in doing so, I felt something else seal shut inside me too. Some small corner of my hope, that Mallory might ever see me as more than a formality. I turned off the light and let the darkness settle. The next morning started with a cloudy sky and a thicker silence than usual. I dressed quickly, not bothering with makeup or earrings. There was no one here I needed to impress. Mallory had scheduled a meeting at the country club to finalize the seating chart and go over last-minute vendor issues. Apparently, my presence was optional but appreciated, according to the group text Charla sent out, as if I were part of some volunteer committee, not blood. The lounge was filled with soft piano music and the smell of fresh croissants. Mallory and Charla sat at a long table with a laptop open and a stack of color-coded printouts in front of them. Dad was there too, thumbing through a magazine with pictures of luxury yachts, his default move when he didn't want to be involved, but also didn't want to leave. I sat off to the side, sipping ice water, trying to make myself invisible. But I caught a glimpse of the seating plan laid out across the table. The names were typed in small script, arranged by table numbers and relationships. Bride's family, groom's family, bridal party, close friends. Then there was a section labeled Other Guests. That's where I saw my name, wedged between an old neighbor from Charla's side and someone listed as cousinish. I felt my stomach sink, but my face didn't move. I took another sip of water and leaned back slightly to get a better look, hoping I had misread it. Charla noticed. "Oh, don't worry about that. It's just alphabetical. The software does that automatically." Mallory didn't even bother to glance up. She was texting again. Probably about flower arrangements or which playlist would keep people from falling asleep between courses. No one corrected it. No one said, "Oops, let's fix that." I sat still, completely still, and let the chill settle into my bones. It wasn't about seating anymore. It was about what they thought of me, what role they assigned me when they thought no one would notice. The day passed in a blur after that. I went through the motions, nodding when asked, helping with minor logistics like moving chairs or confirming the bakery delivery. But my mind was elsewhere, circling that label like it had teeth. The next day, there was a bridal brunch hosted at a nearby vineyard. Sunlight poured in through the wide windows, catching on champagne glasses and pastel floral centerpieces. Women in dresses that cost more than my rent mingled, laughed, and complimented Mallory like she was some kind of royal being coronated. A bell rang lightly, and Mallory stood up, clinking her mimosa glass. "I just want to take a moment to thank my amazing bridal party," she beamed. "You ladies are my ride or dies, my soul sisters. I can't imagine this weekend without you." There was clapping. A few women wiped their eyes. Someone I didn't know turned to me and whispered, "Wait, aren't you her sister?" Mallory heard it. She laughed lightly and said, "Oh, Keslin's not really into this stuff. She's more of a minimalist." Minimalist. Not family. Not important. Just not the right aesthetic, apparently. I didn't flinch. I just nodded. But my silence made a louder statement than any outburst could have. That night, back at the house, I was heading down the hallway toward my room when I heard heels clicking behind me. "Keslin," Mallory called. I stopped but didn't turn. "Look," she said, her tone tight. "I'm trying really hard to keep this weekend smooth. Don't make this about you." I faced her slowly. "It's already not about me. You made sure of that." She crossed her arms, the defensive tilt of her head showing. "This day is about family." I let out a short breath, not quite a laugh. "Then maybe you should have invited mine." Her jaw tightened. She didn't reply, just turned and walked off like she had somewhere important to be, like her reflection mattered more than her roots. I walked the rest of the way to my room, stepped inside, and turned the lock. Not because I was afraid, but because I needed to stop the old me, the peacekeeper, the fixer, the one who smoothed over every rough edge, from walking back out into that hallway and apologizing for making things uncomfortable. This time, I let it be uncomfortable. Morning slipped into late afternoon before I left the room. I'd spent most of the day with the curtains drawn, letting the world carry on without me. But by 6, I had to show up. Rehearsal dinner, vineyard rental, catered menu, and all. My name might have been left off the programs, but my RSVP hadn't been lost in translation. The venue was beautiful, in that curated way Instagram loves. Fairy lights, floating candles, polished wine glasses lined up in military precision. A floral arch framed the head table, draped in cascading whites and soft blush. I could practically hear Charla in my head. A vineyard says elegance without being pretentious. Sure. If elegance meant erasing lineage one toast at a time, the room buzzed with that kind of rehearsed joy. Over-polished smiles, overly loud laughs, the way people carry conversation when they're more aware of being watched than being heard. I chose a seat at the far end of the table, near the wall, where I could watch without being noticed. It was easier that way. Being a ghost was less painful than being deliberately ignored. Eventually, Mallory stood and tapped her glass with a fork. The room hushed. All eyes turned to her. Even the servers paused. She looked radiant. I'll give her that. Confident, poised, rehearsed. like a keynote speaker delivering a performance, not a sister remembering her roots. "I just want to say thank you," she began, voice sweet but steady. "First to my amazing friends who've made this week unforgettable, and of course to my soon-to-be husband, for loving me exactly as I am." Soft laughter. "But most of all," she continued, raising her glass, "to my father, for raising me alone, for teaching me how to be strong, independent, and grounded." There it was. A silence rang out louder than any applause. I didn't blink. I didn't speak. I just turned slightly to look at him, my father, sitting beside her, smiling faintly, lifting his wineglass like it was the most natural thing in the world. He didn't wince, didn't correct her, didn't even glance in my direction. That wasn't an oversight. That was a rewrite, a public erasure wrapped in a compliment. Lorna's name wasn't just absent, it had been buried. And I realized in that moment that grief isn't just about losing someone. It's also about what happens when their memory gets auctioned off like an estate no one wanted to maintain. After dinner, I slipped out early, walked the gravel path toward the back parking lot under the fading light. I didn't say goodbye. No one noticed. The next morning, Charlotte called me into the bridal suite. "We're doing a quick dry run," she said brightly, handing me a spool of ribbon. "Want to help tie the favor boxes?" I nodded, more out of habit than willingness, and joined the others in a circle of activity and hairspray. That's when I saw it. On the groom's hand. The ring. Gold, vintage, delicate engraving on the inner band. It was my mother's wedding ring. The one Burke had promised me on a crisp fall day 5 years ago, when we visited Mom's grave, and he cried harder than I'd ever seen him cry. The one he swore I'd have. "When the time feels right," he'd said, eyes swollen, voice thin. Apparently, the time had felt right for someone else. I didn't speak until Charla leaned over and caught my stare. She smiled almost proudly. "We thought it was poetic," she said. "You know, full circle." Poetic. My grief was now a metaphor to match her aesthetic. I swallowed the heat rising in my chest and said calmly, "My mother is not a metaphor for your closure." Charla blinked. "It's just a ring." "No," I said, "it was a promise, but clearly that meant something different to all of you." She didn't argue, just turned back to tying bows, as if we hadn't spoken at all. That night, I sat on the porch of the guest house alone, a glass of red wine balanced in one hand, my phone in the other. I scrolled to the shared wedding itinerary. My name was listed twice, venue support, logistics runner. I tapped into the calendar app and deleted both entries. Then I opened the notes section and typed, "You seem to have everything covered." I hit send and put the phone face down beside me. The vineyard lights twinkled in the distance. Laughter echoed from the main house. But I sat still, finally letting the air around me settle without expectation. This wasn't walking away. Not yet. But it was the moment the cord began to fray. The day my mother died was one kind of loss. But the day they used her memory as wallpaper, that was the day I stopped mourning. I didn't sleep much that night. Something inside had shifted, not snapped, not broken, but clicked, like a gear finding its notch after grinding too long against a false setting. By morning, I was sitting at the edge of the reception venue's private lounge, going over spreadsheets no one else would bother opening. Line items, vendor confirmations, unpaid balances, they were mine. I had signed the checks, placed the deposits, smoothed the edges of every vision Mallory and Charlotte tossed at me like I was some hired assistant with a clipboard. They never once asked how much I'd already contributed, or what else was due. They just assumed I'd keep showing up with answers and receipts. Charla walked in with a latte in one hand and a clipboard in the other. She didn't greet me. "We'll go over final floor plan and guest flow," she announced to the room. "We'll want to seat the donors close to the dance floor, of course, and the media table to the left of the cake display." Media? I glanced up, confused. Someone was live streaming this? Mallory breezed in next, humming something upbeat, her phone glued to her palm. She barely acknowledged me as she dumped her purse onto a nearby chair. "Oh, we printed thank you cards," she said suddenly, pulling out a neat stack. "For everyone who made this happen." She began handing them out. One for the florist, one for the event planner, one for the photographer, Even the bakery delivery guy, who poked his head in for 5 seconds, got one. When she reached me, she paused, just long enough to be awkward, then passed me entirely. I said nothing. Charla must have noticed the pause. Keslin's more behind the scenes, she said with a wave. She's the detail person, the glue, you know. Mallory chimed in, not even looking up. Yeah, numbers are kinda her thing. I kept my eyes on the spreadsheet, refusing to blink faster than necessary. If I looked up, they'd see it. That I heard them, that it landed, that it lodged somewhere it shouldn't. I pressed my finger to the laptop's trackpad and closed the tab. That evening, I sat on the patio of my hotel with a glass of ginger ale sweating in my hand. I wasn't in the mood for wine, not after what I'd seen. Curiosity had gotten the better of me. I'd clicked the fundraiser link they'd plastered across Facebook, Instagram, even the email signature on Mallory's bridal updates. The page greeted me with a photo I hadn't seen in over 20 years. My mother, Lorna, holding a baby Mallory in the backyard of our old house. The photo was cropped tightly, zoomed in just enough to cut me out completely. I remembered standing next to them, maybe 5 years old, in a yellow sundress with strawberries on the hem. Gone. Erased. Underneath it, the caption read, "Our mom always said love should be celebrated big. Our mom. $8,000 raised under a lie." I stared at the photo longer than I should have, not because I was in it, but because I wasn't. That picture had come from my storage box. I'd scanned it years ago to preserve it after water damage ruined the album. No one else had a digital copy, which meant someone had gone into my things or downloaded it from somewhere they weren't invited. This wasn't nostalgia. It was theft. I didn't text Mallory. I didn't call. I didn't scream. Instead, I opened my laptop, pulled up my payment queue, and found the pending charge to the DJ, a vendor Mallory insisted on, someone with a light-up stage and customized playlists. I clicked cancel. Then I drafted an email. "Hi, Derek. Please redirect your final invoice to the bride's family. I will no longer be covering this cost. Do not use my mother's name in this wedding again. Best, Keslin Draper." I read it over once. No fluff, no explanations, no apology. I hit send. Then I closed the laptop and sat back. The wind picked up a little, brushing a few loose leaves against my ankle. Somewhere off in the distance, someone's speaker played a Frank Sinatra song I couldn't quite make out. Probably a couple rehearsing a first dance they didn't pay for. I didn't want revenge, but I wasn't going to keep sponsoring the ceremony of my own erasure. Let them scramble. Let them figure it out. I paid for the stage, yes, but I sure as hell didn't owe them the spotlight. The next morning was unusually quiet. No chatter outside my door, no texts buzzing about seating arrangements or urgent vendor questions. I welcomed the stillness, even if it felt like a silence made of glass, clear, fragile, and easy to shatter. I was invited to the bridal suite, not by Mallory, but through a sticky note slid under my door. In Charla's handwriting it read, "Need help with final layout. Bring calm energy." That last line almost made me laugh. They never wanted my presence, just my composure, my ability to fix things without making noise. The suite was already humming when I arrived. Hair dryers blowing, perfume mist in the air, champagne being poured too early for anyone not playing pretend. I stayed near the back, a neutral observer, until my gaze caught a glossy booklet on the makeup table. The wedding program. I picked it up and scanned the inside cover. There it was in looping cursive beneath a sepia-toned engagement photo. Mallory Vexley, only daughter of Burke and Charla Vexley. Only daughter. My fingers curled slightly around the edge of the page. It wasn't a mistake. It was design. Intention. This wasn't just about flowers or fonts anymore. This was a deliberate rewrite of our family's record, and my mother had been deleted again. I felt the air shift behind me. Mallory stepped closer, tilting her head as if I were overreacting. "Avi wrote it," she said casually. "Not me." Like that excused it. I held her eyes longer than I ever had before. Her smirk faltered, just a little. Then she turned away, as if bored by the confrontation. I slipped the program into my bag and left without another word. Back in my hotel room, I dropped the program on the desk and opened my laptop. An unread email had landed from Avi. I clicked it open, assuming it was a schedule reminder. It wasn't. Attached was a draft of the final itinerary, but that wasn't the problem. Below it was the entire email thread between Mallory, Charla, and Avi herself. Charla: let's avoid references to the previous marriage. It's confusing and we want to keep things clean. Mallory: yeah, don't include Kesslin in anything formal. No speeches, no close-ups during the ceremony. It'll be easier for everyone. Avi had replied, understood, keeping her presence minimal. Minimal? I wasn't even a footnote. I was an inconvenience they had to manage off-camera. I read the email chain twice, saved the whole thread to a secure folder, and printed a hard copy. Not because I planned to confront them with it, no. This wasn't a public screaming match. This was leverage. They erased me in ink? Fine. I'd use paper too. That afternoon I called up Trevor, the AV technician overseeing the reception's video montage setup. Hi Trevor, I said evenly. I helped fund the projection package for the evening portion of the event. He confirmed. Yep, we're using your files, pictures, video clips, that sort of thing. Don't, I said simply. You no longer have permission to use any content I submitted. A pause on his end. Is everything okay? I won't be part of something I've been written out of, I replied. Please update the files accordingly and notify me when it's done. After that call, I forwarded the printed program and email thread to myself again, storing them in multiple folders. One copy I saved with the title, Truth They Buried. Then I typed up a short message to Charla, just enough to cut without bleeding. If my name is to be deleted, so is my support. Expect revised invoices. I didn't sign it with my name, I signed it, The Daughter You Erased. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't pace or rehearse arguments I'd never say out loud. Instead, I sat on the balcony, wrapped in my mother's old cardigan, and listened to the muffled sounds of rehearsal dinner laughter drifting up from the lawn below. I imagined them rehearsing lines for a script that had no part for me. But they forgot something. I still held the receipts, and not just the financial kind. By the time I walked into the reception hall, I had already rehearsed my silence. I planned to stay at the edge of the room, sip something bitter, and leave before dessert. But plans don't always survive impact. The air was thick with perfume and self-congratulation. I kept to myself, nodding politely at a few distant relatives I hadn't seen since Mom's funeral. The chandelier flickered over white linens, rose-colored napkins, and rows of champagne flutes, all carefully curated, none of it sincere. Then the microphone crackled to life. Mallory stood under the arch of baby's breath and eucalyptus, holding her speech cards like she'd practiced this moment since childhood. Maybe she had. I just want to thank everyone for being here, she began. This day, this family, means the world to me. My jaw already felt tight. She continued with her script. Praise for the vendors, for Dad's support, for Charla's unwavering guidance. Then came the pivot. And to my maid of honor, Avi, who's been like a sister to me, she beamed. That's when she looked directly at me. I mean, technically I have a sister, she said with a playful shrug. But let's be honest. Growing up with a real family taught me what love looks like. Not everyone gets that, but Kesslin, she tried. People laughed, lightly, uncomfortably. The kind of laugh you give when you're not sure what's a joke and what's cruelty dressed as one. Mallory lifted her glass. To the strongest orphan I know, always proving she belongs one spreadsheet at a time. And just like that, the air snapped inside my lungs. A few eyes turned toward me. Some guests looked down into their drinks, embarrassed on my behalf. I saw Burke's expression, vacant, passive, the same one he wore at Mom's graveside. I stood slowly and slipped out the side door, each step steady, but burning. The hallway outside was dim and empty. I walked past the guestbook table, past the memory display, where not a single photo of my mother remained, and ducked into a quiet alcove. My hands shook as I opened my purse. I kept it with me always, the last letter Mom wrote before she died, folded carefully, yellowed slightly at the edges. I unfolded it, needing to see her handwriting, needing something real. What I found was torn, not just creased, ripped. Two halves, one still clinging to her closing line, the other jagged and missing the start. And right there, in the trash beside the bridal suite door, I saw it. The other piece. Crumpled. I didn't make a sound. Didn't cry. Just stood still for a few long seconds, pressing my thumb into my palm like a pressure valve. They hadn't just humiliated me. They desecrated what little I had left of her. I pulled out my phone. Screenshots of the email chain, the deleted invoices, the rewritten program, the cropped fundraiser image. All of it. I uploaded them to a private folder. Then I opened my gallery and took a photo of the torn letter. Both pieces aligned on the marble hallway table like a crime scene I was done hiding. Back inside, the music had just begun. Some mid-tempo number Mallory had probably chosen to pair with their first dance. I stepped through the doors and walked straight to the stage. Avi's eyes widened. Charla leaned into Burke, whispering fast. Mallory turned and froze when she saw me. I reached for the mic. "I won't keep you long," I said, voice steady. "But before you dance, let's talk about what you buried to get here." The room froze. Not a fork moved. "You erased my mother," I said. "Not just from photos, not just from speeches, but from the very paper you handed your guests. You printed a lie." A hush fell so deep, I heard someone set their glass down 2 tables away. "And when you called me an orphan," I continued, turning toward Mallory, "you weren't just making a joke. You were making a declaration that I'm not part of this, that I never was." She opened her mouth, but I raised a hand before she could speak. "I stayed quiet for years. Let you take and take, but I won't watch you dance on what's left of my mother's name." Then I reached into my purse, pulled out the torn letter, and held it up. "This? You couldn't even leave this untouched. You couldn't leave her untouched." People whispered now. One of Mallory's friends put a hand to her mouth. Avi stepped back like she wanted to disappear. I looked at the crowd, then back at my sister. "You made this about family, Mallory. But what you built here, it's a set, and I'm done being the stagehand." I placed the microphone on the stand, and I walked out. Not hurried, not shaking. I left the silence behind like a match left burning. The ballroom door whispered shut behind me, and for a moment, I stood there in the quiet. Just me, the distant hum of air vents, and the echo of everything I hadn't said over the years. Then I turned around, walked back toward the noise, and stepped onto that stage not as a guest, not as a sister, but as a witness. The room hadn't moved. Mallory was still frozen, her mouth parted slightly, wine glass trembling in her hand. Burke avoided eye contact, busy pretending his watch needed polishing. Charla clutched her napkin like it held the script she no longer controlled. I reached for the AD microphone one last time. "You wanted a performance," I said, my voice even. "You choreographed a day of smiles, of curated speeches, and photos with the edges trimmed." I looked at the crowd, dozens of them, faces I'd grown up around, some I hadn't seen since my mother's funeral. "They wrote me out," I continued, "but my mother taught me how to write back, not with lipstick or guilt, but with ink." Gasps were swallowed into silence. I pulled a folded sheet from my bag, one of the programs from the ceremony, the one that read Mallory Vexley, only daughter of Burke and Charla Vexley. I held it high for all to see. "This isn't an oversight. It's not about fonts or space or formatting. It's a decision," I said. "To erase, to rewrite, to silence." I glanced at Mallory. "But you forgot something. You don't get to build a legacy with borrowed memories." Then came the part I didn't rehearse, because pain never needs practice. "Effective immediately," I said, "I withdraw all remaining support for this event, financial, emotional, familial. I am no longer participating in this ceremony, this marriage, or this performance." I didn't wait for their reaction. I didn't need it. I stepped down and moved across the room. My heels barely made a sound on the carpet, but it felt like the ground was shifting underneath every table I passed. Charla blinked rapidly as I handed her a white envelope, sealed and labeled in my handwriting. "In case you ever wonder why I left," it said. Burke got the same. Mallory's envelope was last. She stared at it like it might bite her. I didn't speak. I just let it rest on the white linen before her, beside a plate she hadn't touched. I turned and walked away, straight through the crowd. A few guests whispered. Others followed me with their eyes. One of Mallory's college friends mouthed the word "wow," like she was watching the ending of a movie she never expected. Near the door, I stopped. "I hope," I said without turning, "when you think of this day, when the photos are framed and the cake is long gone, you remember this moment too." And then I walked out. The sun had dipped low enough that the parking lot was soaked in orange light. I took my time down the stone steps, the scent of roses clinging to the air like something trying too hard to stay sweet. My phone buzzed, a message from the venue DJ. "Need final confirmation on playlist. Guest request override?" I tapped out a reply. "Play track 17. Set it to loop once." That song wasn't on the official set list, but I made sure it made the final cut. It was the last song my mother ever sang to me, on a night when I couldn't sleep, wrapped in a fleece blanket, while she hummed lullabies over dishes in the kitchen. As I reached the car and sat behind the wheel, I rolled the window down and waited. A few seconds later, the notes began. Soft at first, then spilling through the open doors of the reception hall like a quiet truth they couldn't shut out. Inside, they might have tried to carry on. Pretend nothing happened, but music tells the truth, even when people lie. Somewhere in that crowd, a few guests stood. One older woman walked out behind me and whispered, "Your mother would have been proud." I nodded, didn't speak. There was no need. I didn't leave to hurt them. I left so they'd finally have to sit with what they'd done. I didn't burn the bridge. They did. I just lit it, so everyone could see. The flight back to Portland was silent in that specific way early morning flights are. No small talk, no clinking of drink carts. Just tired bodies carrying the weight of wherever they'd been. I stared out the window, not watching the clouds, but thinking about what I didn't say in that room. I wasn't angry anymore. Something had burned clean. 2 weeks later, on a quiet Sunday, I pulled into a small parking lot outside Brookside Haven, a modest assisted living facility nestled between sycamore trees and an overgrown rose garden. I didn't call ahead, didn't go in. I'd heard about Dad's minor stroke through a forwarded text. No signature. Just a sterile update. Charla hadn't bothered with warmth. Mallory hadn't bothered at all. I stepped out of the car with one item in hand, a framed 4x6 photo of my mother, Lorna, standing barefoot in our old backyard, a lemon in one hand, and a smile so real it still ached to see. I walked into the front desk, left it along with a sealed envelope. The note inside simply said, she was more than a placeholder. No name, no explanation. Let them guess. Let them remember the woman they replaced, not just in title, but in narrative. I walked away without looking back. By the time I got home to my apartment in Portland, dusk had started to settle. My new place was small, just 2 bedrooms and a patio, but the silence was mine. The air smelled faintly of lavender and cardboard. I was still unpacking. One of the last boxes I opened was marked Mom's Things. Inside, the repaired letter, its edges taped neatly, the gold locket, and a blank, leather-bound journal I bought the day after the wedding. I sat cross-legged on the floor, the journal in my lap. I opened to the first page and wrote in firm, even strokes, "You didn't get to finish your story, Mom, but I'll write mine, with your voice in every line." The words sat on the page like an anchor that finally found a seabed. There was no need to write about Mallory anymore, or Charla, or even Dad. They weren't the ending. They were the noise I walked through to find the next chapter. That night, I made myself a cup of chamomile tea, opened my laptop, and hovered over a message draft I'd been writing for days. It was addressed to Mallory. "You didn't just lose a sister," it began. "You lost someone who would have protected your legacy better than anyone else. I hope the spotlight was worth the silence that will follow." I stared at it, reread it, then deleted it. I didn't need to send it. She'd hear the silence soon enough. The next tab I opened was social media. I scrolled through the photos I'd been tagged in from the wedding, faces smiling through tension, the filtered brightness of curated moments. I hit remove tag on each one by one, until nothing remained. Then I signed out, for good. No post, no farewell, just a quiet click and a small breath out. Later, I stood on my tiny balcony with the city lights stretching far beneath me. I held the locket in one hand, felt the weight of it settle against my palm like it belonged there all along. She wasn't erased. I just had to find where her story continued, and it was in me all along, in how I left, in how I healed, in how I finally stopped asking to be seen and chose, instead, to live as if I already was. Some wounds don't scar. They stay open, just enough to remind you you survived. Sometimes, walking away doesn't mean you've given up. It means you finally decided to stop begging to be seen. For years, I tried to earn my place in a family that treated my presence like a footnote, if they acknowledged me at all. But here's what I've learned. You don't need permission to take up space in your own story, and you sure as hell don't need to stay where love is only given in pieces, with conditions. Maybe you've been the one holding the camera but never in the frame. Maybe you've paid the price but weren't even thanked. Maybe you've kept quiet so others could feel comfortable. But let me ask you, at what point do you stop waiting to be invited and start building your own table? This isn't just my story. It might be yours too. And if it is, maybe it's time to stop shrinking. Maybe it's time to speak. If this story touched something in you, or reminded you of a moment you stayed silent when you should have stood tall, drop a 1 in the comments, or just tell me where you're watching from. I read every single one. And if this story didn't sit right with you, tell me why. Your thoughts matter too. No yelling here, just stories and truth. If this video moved you, inspired you, or made you reflect even just a little, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what comes next. I've got more stories, some painful, some redemptive, all real. Until next time, may you never let anyone rewrite your worth. Hi there, I'm Jolene. At my sister's birthday, they sat me in the hallway, next to a coat rack. No name card at the main table, no photo, no voice in the room. I thought it was just a mistake. But then I saw Rachel in my seat, smiling like she belonged. And the others? They looked the other way. That night didn't just expose a seating chart. It exposed years of betrayal, money stolen behind my back, a letter my mother wrote before she died, hidden from me until it was almost too late. How did it get that far? And why did no one stop her? The first thing I noticed was the fountain. It sprayed upward in a glittering arc outside the entrance, catching the golden Arizona sunlight in a way that felt too perfect, like something you'd see in a luxury hotel ad. Not a place you show up to feeling like a question mark in your own family. I stepped out of my car, adjusting the neckline of my dress. Navy blue, modest but fitted, clean makeup, nude heels, polished enough to say I belonged, not flashy enough to steal attention. I'd practiced this. I was here to keep the peace, to wish Marjorie a happy birthday, to play my role. That's what I always did. Or used to do. Walking into the venue, the air-conditioned lobby hit me like a wall, crisp, scented with something floral and expensive. I saw the check-in table right away. A young woman in a peach blouse smiled brightly, almost too brightly, and chirped, "Hi there, name?" "Jolene Hart," I said, keeping my tone light. She paused, flipping the seating chart clipboard, her eyes scanning. Then that split-second hesitation. Her smile flickered. She pulled a place card from the stack and held it out, her voice dipping slightly. "You're at table 19. I glanced down. It said table 19 in a soft gold script. No fancy ink, no embellishment, just my name and that number. I looked behind her, toward the main ballroom. The double doors were open, revealing round tables, glowing centerpieces, flickering votives. My eyes darted, searching for table 19. She followed my gaze and hesitated again before gesturing, not toward the ballroom, but to the side hallway. "It's just out there, by the coat room." "Excuse me?" I asked, forcing a small laugh. "Is this a mistake?" She blinked, apologetic but firm. "That's your assigned seat." I stared at her for a beat, then down at the card. My hands suddenly felt clammy. I thanked her because I was still on autopilot, and turned toward the hallway. It smelled faintly like lemon cleaner and dust. A long rectangular table was tucked against the wall, a few chairs pushed in haphazardly. No linen, no centerpiece, no lighting. Just forgotten. I stood there blinking. It wasn't just exclusion, it was placement. This wasn't just about seating, it was a statement. A message wrapped in passive aggression. You don't matter enough to sit with us. Trying not to show how badly it stung, I straightened up and made my way toward the ballroom entrance, scanning the room. That's when I saw her. Marjorie, my sister, the birthday girl. She stood in a champagne-toned gown that probably cost more than my monthly rent, laughing with a group near the cake table. Her curls bounced as she tilted her head and smiled, always perfectly poised. And sitting right next to her? Rachel. I stopped mid-step. Rachel. The same woman who had cried to me 3 years ago about needing money to keep her apartment. The same woman I had loaned $2,000 to, who ghosted me after. And now she was sipping wine, nestled into the seat I had expected to take. It was all too coordinated. I walked slowly past them, trying not to draw attention, but Rachel spotted me and did a double take. Then she grinned. "Oh my God, Jolene, it's been ages," she said too loudly. I gave her a tight smile. Yeah, it really has. Marjorie turned. Her eyes swept over me, then to my name card in hand. Her smile was serene, lips slightly parted like she was about to say something kind. But then came the smirk. Barely there, but I saw it. "Did they put you in the hallway?" she asked, voice dripping with innocent surprise. "That's odd. I'm sure it wasn't intentional." Intentional. The word landed in my chest like a hammer. I glanced around. My father was pouring himself a whiskey at the bar. My aunt and cousin were seated comfortably, laughing, not a care in the world. Every seat was filled, with people I grew up with, people I thought I meant something to. None of them looked surprised I wasn't seated with them. Marjorie leaned in a little closer, lowered her voice just enough. "It's just a dinner. Don't be dramatic." I froze. That phrase, "don't be dramatic," was the Hart family motto when anyone dared call out mistreatment. When someone finally cracked under the weight of years of silence, I met her gaze head on. She blinked first. And that's when I knew. She didn't expect me to come. Or worse, she did. And this was her way of making sure I knew exactly where I stood. Still, I tried to smile. "Of course, just a dinner." She turned back to her circle, already dismissing me. I took a step back, then another. The hallway wasn't far. Neither was the exit. I walked past the photo booth, past the cake table, past the glossy laughter and the smell of over-buttered appetizers. I reached the hallway again, staring at the folding chair by the coat rack. For a second, I thought about sitting down, about taking the card, plastering on a grin, and pretending I didn't care. But then I realized I wasn't walking away from the dinner. I was walking away from pretending I still belonged. So I did. The hallway was quiet, too quiet for a celebration that loud. I stood there a moment longer, as if waiting for someone to realize the mistake. But no one came, so I left, only I didn't head home. Not yet. Instead, I circled the back garden, letting the soft glow from the patio lights follow me around the edge of the venue. The champagne buzz of laughter floated from the open doors. I found a shaded bench and sat, letting the stone beneath me ground my racing thoughts. 38 minutes, maybe 40, had passed since I arrived, and already I felt erased. A few deep breaths later, I decided I'd give it one more try. Not for them, but for me. I wasn't going to beg for a seat, but I wanted to see if anyone even noticed I was missing. I slipped back inside. The photographer had arrived. His camera strap swung as he directed everyone toward the open floor near the fireplace, where the light hit just right. I lingered near the edge of the crowd, not sure if I should approach. Then I heard someone say, "All right, let's get a big family shot," and my chest tightened. I stepped closer, expecting someone, anyone, to wave me over. They didn't. I made eye contact with my Aunt Patricia, who immediately turned to whisper something to her husband. A cousin, Nate, I think, saw me and offered a stiff shrug, mouthing something like, "They're just doing core family first. Maybe for the slideshow." Slideshow. The same one Marjorie had been planning for weeks, the one she'd asked everyone to send photos for. I had emailed her 6. She hadn't replied. I took another step back, quietly. The camera flashed. Marjorie stood front and center, arms looped around Rachel and Travis. My seat thief and my sister's boyfriend side by side, both grinning like they'd won something. And I wasn't even a footnote. I walked toward the nearest restroom to hide, even just for a few minutes. The lights inside were too bright, too sterile. I closed myself into a stall and finally pulled out my phone, just to distract my thoughts. Big mistake. The notifications were piling up. Likes, tags, messages. I opened Instagram, and there it was. Marjorie's latest post. Grateful for every soul that made tonight magical # blessed # family first. The photo? The group shot. My family. My blood. Laughing, glowing, polished to perfection. Except, I wasn't in it. I scrolled back, zooming in. I remembered standing near the corner when the picture was taken. I was in the frame, but she'd cropped it, and she hadn't tagged me, not even a mention in the caption. One comment said, "You two are literal sisters' goals." Another, "That smile says everything. You're surrounded by real love." I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted copper. Real love? No. This was curated loyalty. A story where I didn't exist, and I couldn't shake the feeling that she'd done it intentionally. Suddenly, I was 12 again, at Grandpa's birthday. My cousins sat lined up for the family picture, and I'd arrived late from dance rehearsal. I remember running toward the group, still in my leotard, my hair frizzy with sweat. I stood at the edge of the frame, and later when the photo was printed, someone had used scissors to trim the border, cutting me out. My mother claimed it was to fit the frame. I believed her. Back then, I always did. Even as a child, I learned how to be invisible. That memory cracked open something deeper. A pattern I hadn't wanted to admit. I'd been erased before, not just from photos but from holidays, from phone calls, from memories people chose not to keep. This post wasn't just a picture. It was the digital version of that scissor. Sharp, deliberate, final. I stepped out of the stall and leaned over the sink, splashing cold water on my face. My reflection stared back, makeup still intact, eyes a little too bright. I dried my hands slowly, folded the towel, and dropped it in the bin. The party noise rolled through the hallway again. More laughter, more glass clinking. But for me, the party was over long before the first toast. And somehow being erased from a photo hurt more than being erased from a room. I didn't go back inside right away. Instead, I pushed open the side door that led out to the garden lounge. The scent of blooming jasmine drifted in the breeze, mixed with faint traces of vanilla candles from the buffet tables. It was quiet out there. Calm. Like a different world from the curated chaos inside. I needed air. Not just oxygen, but space. Space from the digital slap I'd just taken. From the smiley captions and hollow hashtags. From the memory of being intentionally framed out of someone else's narrative. I stood by the edge of the fountain, scrolling through the comments on Marjorie's post again. Each word felt heavier the longer I read. Fake admiration, fabricated praise, performative sisterhood. And then one comment caught my eye. "You've always been the one looking out for her. You're the best big sis ever." I stared at it for a moment too long. Then, without thinking, I whispered aloud to no one but the air. "Yeah, just like last time." It wasn't meant to be said, but once it left my mouth, something inside me cracked open. 2 years ago. I hadn't thought about that morning in a long time. Probably because I didn't want to. Back then, I was job hunting hard after taking time off from corporate to help Dad through his heart surgery. I'd landed an interview at Zenith Financial, a major firm in downtown Phoenix. The kind of role that could have reset everything. Full salary, benefits, a clear track back into the game. The night before the interview, I was at Marjorie's for dinner. She poured us wine, asked about my outfit, my resume, even offered to steam my blouse so it didn't wrinkle in the car. She seemed helpful, too helpful. Before bed, I double-checked the interview location. Lincoln Tower, Suite 3204. That's what the email said. But the next morning, as I sat in my car ready to punch in the GPS, I got a text from her. "Marjorie, hey, just a heads up, don't go to Lincoln Tower. It's the Lincoln Corporate Building. They look identical. I got lost there once. Good luck. You'll crush it." I paused, checked the email again, but her confidence, her certainty, made me second-guess myself. I changed the destination and drove across town. By the time I realized the mistake, I was 25 minutes late. I called the front desk at Zenith, apologizing, trying to explain the confusion. But they'd already moved on. The recruiter wouldn't reschedule. I was devastated. When I told Marjorie, Her response was a soft gasp and a half laugh. Oh shoot, I must have mixed them up. I was sure it was the corporate building. But hey, everything happens for a reason, right? You'll bounce back. I told myself it was an honest mistake. She didn't mean it. Maybe she really was confused. Maybe she was just trying to help. But now, standing there in that garden, seeing how precisely she could manipulate a moment, a caption, a seating chart, it all clicked. That text wasn't sisterly concern. It was control, dressed up in emojis. She hadn't messed up. She redirected me away from opportunity, away from power, away from anything that might have made me too equal, too threatening. And what made it worse? I believed her. I made myself small in order to keep the peace, the kind of peace that always came at my expense. My stomach churned, not just from the realization, but from the years I spent excusing it, rationalizing it, telling myself that if I was patient, if I was forgiving, if I didn't make waves, someday she'd see me the way she pretended to on Instagram. That day never came, and it wouldn't, because the truth is, Marjorie wasn't careless. She was calculated. She didn't misguide me by accident. She redirected my entire life on purpose. I re-entered the venue through the side entrance, brushing past a waiter who offered me a flute of champagne I didn't take. The music had shifted into something slower now, the kind of ambient jazz that filled in silences too awkward for conversation. I found a small bench near the back bar, partly shaded by a decorative ficus. It was tucked far enough into the corner that no one would notice me, not unless they were looking. And no one was. I was still scrolling through the comments under Marjorie's post when someone's shadow interrupted my screen. Hey, Travis said. I looked up, startled. He had 2 drinks in hand. One of them held out to me. I figured you might need this. I took the glass but didn't drink. He sat beside me, too close, too casual. I've noticed it's been tense tonight, he said, drawing out the word like he wasn't sure it fit. Between you and Marjorie. I kept my face neutral. She told me things have been rough between you two, he went on. Said you've been kind of distant lately, that she's tried to reach out. I laughed, short and dry. She's good at making herself the victim, I replied, letting the bitterness show for the first time that night. He studied me for a second, then tilted his head. I mean, do you think maybe you're just a little jealous? I don't mean that in a harsh way. It's just, that's how it sounded when she talks about you. There it was. That word, jealous. The catch-all defense mechanism for when someone dares to call out injustice in a family. The shield behind which manipulation gets to hide and flourish. I stared into my untouched drink, the fizz having already gone flat. I used to believe she meant well, I said softly. I don't anymore. He didn't answer right away, just shifted awkwardly in his seat. I'm not saying you don't have your side, he added. I just know Marjorie's been under a lot of pressure lately. I turned toward him, finally meeting his eyes. Pressure doesn't give you permission to rewrite someone else's life story. He blinked. I stood, set the drink down on the bar, and walked toward the main room, needing space again, but this time not to breathe, to remember. Across the room, Rachel was laughing with someone near the dessert table, her voice just loud enough to carry over the music. I froze. Rachel. I hadn't thought about her in months, not since she'd vanished. Flashback. A year ago my phone buzzed just after midnight. Rachel's name lit up my screen. She was crying, panicked, said she was 2 months behind on rent, couldn't make her car payment, and was scared she'd lose everything. I didn't even hesitate. I wired her $4,000 the next morning, from my emergency savings, money I'd planned to use for dental work, or to finally take that road trip up the coast. She promised to pay me back. She never did. Weeks passed, then silence. She stopped answering calls, stopped replying to messages. Now here she was, at Marjorie's party dressed in designer, sipping wine like nothing ever happened. I glanced back at Travis, who was now talking to Marjorie again, completely unaware. Of course he was. He only knew the version of me Marjorie curated, the edited one, the difficult one, the ungrateful sister. My chest tightened. It wasn't the money that hurt the most. It was realizing how replaceable I'd always been to the people I thought I was loyal to. I moved to the side of the room, leaned against the wall, eyes locked on the party around me, the performance, the curated narrative. And suddenly, I wasn't just hurt, I was furious. At the lies, at the rewriting, at the way everyone seemed so comfortable building an entire version of me that suited their story better than the truth ever did. If I stayed silent again, if I kept swallowing my pride just to make others more comfortable, I'd disappear completely. I felt it, like a line in the sand had been drawn right beneath my heels, and for once, I wasn't stepping back. If no one else will speak the truth, then maybe it's time I did. The air inside had grown thicker, like it had absorbed the tension radiating off me. I drifted toward the courtyard doors, pretending I needed fresh air again, but really, I just needed space from their curated ignorance. As I sat on the stone bench tucked near the lavender hedge, a voice approached softly from behind. "Jolene?" I turned to find Wanda, our cousin on Mom's side, but more like Switzerland in this war of sisters. She always stayed out of family messes, until now. She looked nervous, her hands wrapped around a folded piece of silk. She sat beside me, smoothing the fabric in her lap like she wasn't sure what to say. "I've been holding on to something," she finally whispered. "Too long, probably. And maybe I shouldn't be giving it to you now. But I can't pretend I don't see what's happening anymore." I frowned. "What is it?" She unwrapped the silk carefully, revealing an envelope, the kind with a gold edge and soft paper, my grandmother's stationery. I would have recognized it anywhere. "She wrote this for you," Wanda said, "right before she passed. Told me to give it to you only if things ever went too far." My hands trembled as I took it. I hesitated. A letter from the dead doesn't land lightly, but something in Wanda's face told me I needed to read it now, not later. I broke the seal. The handwriting was shaky, but familiar. My grandmother never minced words, and this letter was no exception. "Jolene," it began, "you've always seen Marjorie clearly. That's why she's always tried to blur your reflection." I stopped reading, already breathless. Wanda sat in silence beside me, letting the words work their way through me. "It's not your fault," the letter continued. "Some people only thrive when others are diminished, and you, my bright girl, never deserved to be made smaller so others could feel bigger." I felt something crack open in my chest. It wasn't pain, it was validation. Proof that I wasn't imagining the years of erasure, of being talked over, written out, moved aside. This letter was truth, left behind like a breadcrumb trail from someone who'd always known. I wiped my cheek before the tears had time to fall. "You okay?" Wanda asked softly. I nodded, but didn't speak. She took a deep breath, eyes on the envelope now resting in my lap. "There's something else," she said. Of course there was. "After Grandma passed," Wanda continued, "I let Marjorie handle the inheritance. She said she'd combine both of your shares into one account, said she had a better financial advisor. It sounded logical at the time." I blinked slowly. "You let her handle mine too?" Wanda's eyes filled with something like shame. "I trusted her. I thought she'd do the right thing. But after a few months, I never saw your name on the account again. I asked once." She told me not to worry, that you decided to pass your share to her voluntarily. I turned toward her, heat rising in my throat. "Voluntarily?" She nodded, eyes down. "I didn't question it. I wanted to, but I was scared I'd make things worse." There it was again. Silence dressed up as peace. "She stole from me," I said quietly, "in broad daylight, and you all let her." Wanda didn't argue. She didn't defend. She just looked broken. I stood, sliding the letter back into its envelope. I wasn't going to scream. I didn't need to throw a drink or flip a table. All I needed to do was walk. So I did. I pushed the doors open and walked straight toward Marjorie. She stood near the fireplace, laughing with her circle, hand on Travis's arm like she was center stage. I stepped close enough that only she could hear me, but loud enough that everyone would notice I was speaking. "If you ever try to erase me again," I said, my voice low but steady, "I'll make sure everyone sees exactly who you are." She blinked, didn't speak, and for the first time in a long time, I knew she understood I wasn't bluffing. She blinked, but didn't speak, because she knew I meant it this time. By the time I stepped back into the room, something had shifted. The lighting hadn't changed, the music was still going, and glasses still clinked, but the energy, the undercurrent, was different. Looser, louder, like people had finally surrendered to the night. Laughter rang sharper, more frequent, and champagne had clearly done its job. But beneath the surface, something else had begun to creep in, something heavier. Not everyone felt it yet, but I could see it in a few faces. The ones not caught in the buzz. A furrowed brow here, a side glance there. Whatever tension had been mine alone earlier, it had started to spread. I cut through the room quietly, angling toward the back bar where I could grab some water and disappear into a shadowed corner until I figured out what to do next. I wasn't ready for a confrontation. Not yet. I just needed a moment. But that's when I saw him. Travis stood a little away from the others, half shielded behind one of the floral arrangements near the bar. His posture was stiff, head tilted down toward the phone in his hand. The expression on his face didn't match the rest of the room. Tense, confused, like he was trying to solve a puzzle that made no sense. Definitely not the look of someone basking in his engagement party. When he saw me, his eyes lingered for a beat. Then he lifted his hand in a hesitant wave. An invitation. "Hey," he said as I got close. His voice was low. "Can I talk to you for a second?" I nodded, not trusting myself to say anything yet. He looked around to make sure no one was paying attention, then turned the screen of his phone toward me. "I wasn't snooping," he said quickly. "I was trying to show her this dumb meme, and this was open." On the screen, a series of text messages lit up in a familiar thread. Marjorie's thread. Still open, still active. Probably from earlier in the day. She must have forgotten to close it. I didn't need to scroll. Just one message, sitting right there in the middle of the screen, told me enough. She's a leech, always has been. She shows up just to cling to the edges of my spotlight. My name wasn't in it. Didn't have to be. We both knew who it was about. My stomach didn't drop out from under me. Not in surprise, anyway. It was more like confirmation, like the final piece of a puzzle clicking into place. I didn't flinch, didn't even look away. Travis did. "I didn't know she talked about you like that," he said, voice quieter now. "She talks about everyone like that," I replied. My tone was even, almost tired. "You're just next." He blinked, taken aback. "I thought you two were just competitive." I nearly laughed. It came out more like an exhale. "No, Travis, she competes. I've just been surviving." He looked like he wanted to say more, maybe offer some defense or apology. I cut him off with a small shake of my head. "You're not the reason she's like this, but you let her stay that way. That's on you." His lips parted, but he didn't argue. Before either of us could say another word, Wanda appeared beside me. I hadn't even seen her coming. She wasn't holding a drink this time. Her hands were full of paper, some printed, others folded, some clipped together with color-coded tabs. She looked calm, serious. "I found these," she said, just loud enough for us to hear, "in Grandma's filing cabinet. I didn't know what they were at first, but—" She handed them to me without fanfare. I flipped through the top few sheets. At first, it looked like normal financial paperwork, emails, transfer records, annotations in the margins. But then I saw the subject lines. One stopped me cold. "Nonprofit allocation for birthday event." I froze. I read it again. Then again. This party, this entire event, from the champagne to the venue to the damn flower walls, had been categorized under our grandmother's charitable foundation. Listed as a nonprofit expenditure. This wasn't just unethical, it was fraud, straight-up theft. I looked up from the papers, heart pounding but face calm. My gaze moved across the room until I found her, Marjorie, still glowing in the middle of the crowd, head thrown back in a picture-perfect laugh, still holding court like nothing could touch her. But something had cracked now, and I wasn't going to whisper anymore. I moved toward the center of the room, each step slow and deliberate. As I neared the DJ booth, he instinctively turned down the music. Maybe out of habit, maybe sensing something in my expression. I turned to face the crowd, papers still in hand. "Excuse me," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it carried, firm, clear. Conversations stalled. Heads turned. Even Marjorie, from across the room, looked up, eyebrows raised. "This party you're all enjoying?" I said, scanning the room. It wasn't a gift. It wasn't a family celebration. It was a scheme, funded by a fake charity submission under my grandmother's name. A ripple moved through the crowd. Small gasps, quick glances, frozen expressions. I held up the papers. Every catered bite, every glass of champagne, paid for by money that was supposed to go to actual nonprofit work. She filed this event under a fraudulent foundation expense. Someone near the bar whispered, "Is she serious?" "Yes," Travis said, loud enough to be heard. "She is." I looked over. He didn't waver. Wanda stepped beside me. Her voice was calm, steady. "She used the trust. Grandma's foundation. Without permission. This party isn't just tacky, it's criminal." Marjorie moved toward us now, her face pale. She looked like she was about to say something, but nothing came out. Her mouth opened, then closed again. Her silence was louder than anything she could have shouted. The room changed. Not in chaos, not in volume. It was subtler than that, like when the air pressure drops before a storm. One person set their drink down and walked away. Another turned from Marjorie and stepped back, slow and deliberate. Her circle, her carefully curated audience, began to thin. First one, then three, then more. People who had just been laughing with her were now avoiding her eyes. She stood there, lips trembling, frozen in place as the truth settled around her like dust. And this time there was no spotlight to cling to. Wanda's hands trembled slightly as she stepped forward, holding a stack of papers like a shield. Her voice cracked once but didn't waver. "She didn't just misfile a party," she said, raising her voice slightly over the growing murmur. "Marjorie created a fake nonprofit and routed the trust through it. This entire event is misappropriated. It's not just dishonest, it's criminal." The room rippled with sound. A cousin from Dad's side, Brian, the one who always cited law textbooks like scripture, spoke up without moving from his seat. "That's misappropriation, and possibly tax fraud." A stunned pause, then a few audible gasps. Marjorie's face turned ghost pale. For a woman who lived on optics, cracks were beginning to show. "No," she finally managed, eyes wide, voice shaky. "That's not what happened. I didn't do anything illegal." Wanda held up the printed email chain. "Then explain why your name is on the tax forms. Explain the EIN number that matches a shell charity registered 3 weeks before the party." A sharp inhale cut through the noise, then another. The energy of the room twisted into something raw, disbelief colliding with amusement, a scandal wrapped in sequins. That's when Marjorie snapped. Her mask didn't just crack, it shattered. "Oh, give me a break," she shouted. "You all love a little drama, don't you?" People flinched at the suddenness. "You think you're better than me, Jolene? You're not. You're a leftover, a walking sob story." Her voice climbed. Guests stepped back, eyes wide, hands on phones. Then it happened. She hurled her champagne glass. It missed me by inches, exploding against the floor. Glass and sticky fizz sprayed toward the buffet table. No one moved. Except one guest. A younger woman near the dessert station who held her phone up, already recording. Another voice came from the edge of the room. "You might want to stop talking. This is live on Instagram." But Marjorie didn't stop. She kept going. Her words slurred, not from alcohol, but from rage left to ferment too long. "She's a parasite," she said. "Always has been. She clings to the edges, waiting for someone else to make her interesting. She feeds off pity. She needs to be the victim. That's all she has." Her voice was shrill now. I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I didn't say a single word. I didn't have to. Because 5 seconds later, someone pulled up the clip, and by the 10-second mark, it was already posted. The comment section exploded. "This is next-level narcissism. She's unraveling, and the camera caught every second. The sister's just standing there like a statue. Queen energy." Marjorie caught sight of the post on someone's phone and lunged, trying to grab it. "Don't film me!" she shrieked. "This is private!" But nothing about this night was private anymore. Travis walked past me without saying a word. He slipped the expensive watch she'd bought him off his wrist and set it on the table beside the guest book. That tiny motion was louder than any goodbye. The music still played softly in the background, like a cruel joke. No one laughed now. No one raised a glass. They just watched as the center of the party unraveled in real time, and through it all, I stood still. Not because I couldn't speak, but because I didn't need to. The evidence was everywhere now. And for the first time in her life, Marjorie stood in a room full of people and felt completely alone. I didn't look back. Not when I passed the gift table, cluttered with unopened wine bottles, rumpled tissue paper spilling from glossy bags. Not when I walked by the untouched cake, flawless still, save for a single missing slice, like it was waiting for something that never came. Not even when I heard Travis say my name, softly, almost apologetically, like he didn't know whether he still had the right to. There was nothing left for me in that room. The weight I'd carried for years, every buried feeling, every forced smile, every moment I'd bitten my tongue just to keep the peace, was gone. Not like a balloon drifting away. Not soft. More like a stone being dislodged from my chest. A boulder shoved off the cliff's edge. Nothing left to hold it up. Nothing left to hold me back. I pushed open the double doors and stepped into the night. The Arizona air was cool, crisp in that dry desert way, brushing against my skin like a reset. Above me, the sky stretched wide, dark and clear, scattered with stars that glittered indifferently. They didn't care about family drama or ruined parties. They'd been here before us, and they'd be here long after. It made everything feel smaller, lighter, right. I was halfway to my car when I heard footsteps behind me, quick, hesitant. "Jolene!" I stopped and turned. Wanda stood under the venue's awning, a small bundle in her hands wrapped in a deep burgundy napkin. Her posture was stiff, uncertain, like she'd made a last-minute decision she wasn't sure she'd stick to. "I wasn't going to say anything," she said, voice low. "But after tonight, after what you did, I think you deserve this." She stepped forward and held it out to me. I took it, confused but quiet. She didn't explain, didn't give me the chance to ask questions. She just gave me a small nod, turned around, and disappeared back through the doors without another word. The bundle felt light, soft. Inside the napkin was an envelope, aged, worn at the corners, the paper yellowed from time and maybe guilt. My name was written across the front in handwriting I hadn't seen in years. My mother's. My breath caught. For a long moment, I just stood there under the stars, envelope in hand, everything else suspended. When I finally sat in the driver's seat, I didn't start the car. I didn't even reach for the ignition. The interior light cast a faint glow, quiet and warm, like it knew this was a moment meant for stillness. I unwrapped the napkin and turned the envelope over in my hands. The seal had already been broken. Wanda must have read it, or at least opened it. Maybe she'd wrestled with the decision to give it to me, afraid of what it might stir up. Maybe she'd held on to it for years, waiting for the right moment. I opened it slowly. The letter was short, 1 page. My name at the top, written with the same care I remembered from childhood. Labels on lunch bags, permission slips, birthday cards. "Jolene, I know you probably won't understand why I waited this long. Maybe I don't even understand it myself. But if you're reading this, it means Wanda did the brave thing and gave it to you. I want to tell you something I never had the courage to say out loud. I loved both of my daughters, but I failed you in different ways." I stopped reading, just stopped. My breath came shallow, my heart suddenly loud again, pounding against my ribs like it wanted out. "You weren't hard to love. You were easy to overlook, and that was my failure, not yours. I let Marjorie perform. I let her narrate our lives, and I let you shrink. You deserved better, not because you earned it, but because love should never be earned in the first place." My eyes blurred. The words swam. I tried to blink the tears away, but they came faster than I could stop them. A few slipped down my cheek and landed on the page, the ink bleeding slightly where the salt water touched it. But I let it happen. I wasn't crying from heartbreak anymore. This grief was something different, something sharper, but cleaner, like alcohol on an open wound. Burning, yes, but also healing. It hurt, but it clarified. I folded the letter slowly, carefully, and tucked it into my bag. I wasn't going to reread it every day. I didn't need to. Just knowing it existed was enough. Just knowing she'd written it, that she had seen me, even if too late, meant something. I started the engine but didn't drive. I sat there, breathing, thinking, not about the party I'd just walked away from, or the shocked faces, or the text messages that would be flying by now. Not even about Marjorie, standing alone in the center of the wreckage she built. What mattered was this moment, the quiet inside the car, the silence that finally felt earned, not awkward or heavy, but honest. There was a voice in my head, not loud, not demanding, just present, and it wasn't asking, "What now?" It was saying, "Finally." Finally, I wasn't contorting myself to fit into someone else's version of the story. I wasn't reaching out for scraps of approval or chasing after the hope that someone might one day see me. My phone buzzed once on the passenger seat. A message from Travis. "I'm sorry." I stared at the screen for a long time. No anger, no ache, no righteous triumph, just peace. I powered off the phone and set it aside. And in that quiet space, something unexpected took root. Something soft but strong. Something that felt like freedom. Not just freedom from Marjorie. Freedom from the roles she cast me in. From the scripts I never agreed to. From the shadows I never belonged in to begin with. I wasn't anyone's backdrop anymore. This wasn't an escape. It was a reclamation. It had been a week. 7 days since I stepped out of that banquet hall and into a version of my life that didn't revolve around being tolerated. 7 mornings where I didn't wake up replaying conversations in my head, trying to twist myself into someone more likable, more palatable, more invisible. In those 7 days, the world hadn't stopped, but Marjorie's had cracked wide open. The video went viral by morning. A cousin with a decent TikTok following had posted it with the caption, "Family drama gone corporate." Last I checked, it had over 800,000 views and counting. The comments were relentless. Some cruel, some vindicating, all of them honest. By Wednesday, one of the nonprofits Marjorie used to volunteer for had issued a public statement. "We are terminating all association due to clear ethical violations." The email made its way to my inbox via someone I barely remembered from high school who now worked in PR. They wrote, "I thought you'd appreciate seeing this." Travis moved out of their shared apartment the next day. Wanda mentioned it over the phone, carefully, like she wasn't sure if I'd want to hear. I didn't ask for details. By Friday, Marjorie's Instagram was gone. Just gone. No public apology, no explanation. Just the digital equivalent of a house with the lights off and curtains drawn. And me? I was still here. Still quiet, but not silent. That Friday evening, I sat in my apartment, barefoot on the hardwood, folding laundry while an old Billie Holiday record played in the background. It was domestic, peaceful, unremarkable, and that felt revolutionary. My phone buzzed, a voicemail. I played it on speaker, letting it echo through the room. "Jolene, it's Travis. I just want to say I'm sorry for believing what she said, for not asking more questions. You didn't deserve any of it. I see that now. I hope you're okay. I really do." I didn't save it. I didn't delete it either. Instead, I reached into my drawer and pulled out the letter. My mother's letter. I'd read it every night since Wanda gave it to me. Not out of obsession, but because every line seemed to light a part of me I didn't know had dimmed. That night, I framed it. Hung it above my writing desk, just below the window where the sunlight hit around noon. The next morning, I opened a new bank account, just in my name. I put in exactly $47,200. That was how much Wanda estimated had been diverted from my inheritance. The money wasn't from a lawsuit or a returned check. It came from me, months of side gigs, freelance copywriting, and the emergency fund I rebuilt brick by brick after Marjorie had bulldozed it. Then I wrote a check, same amount, made out to Sunridge Women's Resource Center. No return address, no name, just one line in the memo, "You deserve better." I mailed it from the blue box down the block, then stopped for a croissant on the way home. I ate it while sitting in the park, watching strangers laugh like they didn't know the world could collapse over birthday cake and passive aggression. A little boy dropped his balloon. I caught it just before it floated too high. His mother smiled, reaching out for it. "Thanks," she said. "That was sweet of you." I nodded. "Sometimes you just need someone to see you." She tilted her head. maybe sensing more in my tone than I meant to reveal, then turned back to her kid. And I walked on, past the park, past the bakery, past the quiet stretch of houses where porch lights flickered on at dusk, not toward anything dramatic. Just forward. I used to fight for a seat at their table. Now I'm building my own. Looking back, I don't regret walking away. Not because it was easy, but because, for the first time, I chose myself without asking for permission. If there's anything I've learned, it's this. Sometimes the people who claim to love you the loudest are the very ones who silence you the most. And family? It isn't about blood. It's about truth, safety, and being seen for who you are without needing to shrink to fit their version of you. To anyone watching this who's ever felt like the outsider in their own story, know this. You don't need to fight for scraps of respect from those who benefit from your silence. You're allowed to take up space. You're allowed to walk away. And you are never too old, too late, or too broken to rewrite your role in the story. Now I'm curious. Have you ever been made to feel small by someone who was supposed to protect you? What did you do? Let me know in the comments. If this story spoke to you, even just a little, drop a 1 in the chat or tell me where you're watching from. And if you didn't like it, tell me why. Your perspective matters too. And hey, if you want more stories like this, real, raw, and honest, hit that subscribe button and be the first to hear the next one. Thanks for being here. You didn't have to be, but I'm so glad you were. Hi, I'm Laureen. At my sister's engagement party, they seated me in the hallway, right next to the restrooms. No explanation, no mistake, just silence, like I didn't matter. Then came the photos without me, the speech I wasn't allowed to give, the jokes at my expense, all while smiling guests clinked champagne glasses like nothing was wrong. But what they didn't expect was that I'd stop staying quiet. What happened next? It didn't just shake the room, it tore the mask off an entire family lie. I pulled into the resort's lower lot, the one they usually kept for staff or overflow guests. My GPS had chirped, "You've arrived," but I didn't feel like I'd arrived anywhere that welcomed me. The sky over Santa Barbara was clear, that kind of sharp California blue that made every shadow starker. There were no parking attendants in sight, just white tents fluttering in the distance and a long gravel walk ahead. I checked my lipstick in the mirror, reapplied a dab of concealer to my tired eyes, then slipped on my heels. The navy dress I'd carefully chosen felt suddenly too understated, too deliberate. At the front gate, a young woman in a headset glanced up. "Hi, welcome. Are you with the bridal party or guest side?" "Laureen Carter, I'm Trista's sister," I said, offering a smile that didn't quite stick. Her fingers paused on her tablet. I saw it, the flicker of hesitation, then the quick professional smile reassembled. "Oh yes, you're seated at table H." "Where is that?" "Right through the hallway, just past the coat room." My lips parted, but the protest died there. I followed her finger toward the side wing. Behind me, a pair of older guests were ushered inside the grand ballroom, laughter trailing behind them. I peeked at the seating chart. Trista's friends, her fiancé's colleagues, extended cousins I hadn't spoken to in years, all lit under chandeliers and cascading orchids. My name was nowhere on that board. I clutched my invite card, the one with calligraphy so pristine it felt ironic now. "Laureen Carter, honored guest," it had said. Honored, right next to the mop closet. As I stepped toward my designated table, the hallway grew colder, not physically, just emotionally sterile. Someone had placed an air freshener near the restroom door. That told me everything. I set my purse down at table H, which had 3 chairs and no centerpiece. It felt less like a reception and more like a punishment. 2 days earlier, I'd received an email from Trista's assistant because she couldn't bother to send it herself. "Please avoid wearing red, white, black, or bright yellow. The bride would prefer soft neutrals or navy tones. We trust you understand." I understood, loud and clear. The message wasn't about elegance. It was about not standing out, about making sure I faded quietly into her backdrop. So I wore navy, not because I was trying to make peace, but because I wanted to prove I could play by her rules, even when they were rigged. I watched the guests filing past. No one looked my way. A waiter came by and offered me water, not champagne, not wine, just water. like I was there to monitor coat check, not celebrate my sister's engagement. I caught a glimpse of myself in the hallway mirror. Everything about me blended. Dark hair tied back, understated heels, even my smile. It didn't make a ripple. Maybe that was the point. Somewhere, a bell chimed. Probably a signal for the cocktail hour. I didn't move. For years, I'd swallowed the jabs, the silence, the constant reminder that I was the quiet sister, the one who didn't demand attention, the one who didn't need a spotlight because she brought her own books to family events. But this was new, banished to the hallway like a last-minute RSVP. I pressed my hands flat on my thighs, steadying myself. I didn't want to cause a scene. I wasn't here to ruin anything. I came because, despite everything, part of me still thought, maybe things could change. Maybe someone would turn to me and say, "I'm glad you're here." Instead, I sat by the door, invisible, silent, and as voices from the main hall grew louder, champagne corks, laughter, applause, I realized something I hadn't let myself say out loud until now. I hadn't come to start drama. I came to be part of something. But sitting next to the utility closet, I finally understood. Maybe I was never meant to belong. I stayed in that chair longer than I care to admit, watching the hall fill with people who didn't seem to notice I was missing from the room, or from anything, really. Laughter spilled down the corridor in bursts. Glasses clinked. Someone in stilettos walked past me and didn't even glance down. After what felt like an hour, but was probably closer to 30 minutes, I stood up. I needed to move. Sitting there made me feel like I was sinking into the carpet. I wandered slowly, staying along the outer edges of the reception area. I didn't want to draw attention. Or worse, pity. I kept my face neutral, the kind of polite blankness I'd mastered during years of family gatherings. To the right of the bar was a tall display labeled, "Our Family Through the Years." White letters in looping cursive sat atop a 3-panel board, decorated with fake eucalyptus leaves and tiny fairy lights. A sign beneath it read, "Photos curated by the bride herself." That made me hesitate. Still, I walked over, telling myself not to expect anything. But I did. Of course I did. Each photo was printed on glossy cardstock and framed with gold tape. Trista at 4 years old with cake smeared across her cheeks. Trista at her high school prom. Trista at college graduation. Arms thrown around friends. Family vacations. Birthday parties. Christmas mornings. Some images I remembered vividly, because I was there, but I wasn't in any of them. Not once. Not a blurred shoulder. Not a side profile. Not even the back of my head. I stared longer than I should have, hoping maybe I'd missed one. Maybe a small group photo tucked near the corner, one where I hadn't been cropped out. But no, my name wasn't there. My face wasn't there. It was like I'd never existed in her story. I didn't hear Marjorie approach until she spoke behind me. "She worked hard on that board," she said, like it excused the erasure. I turned to her. "You didn't notice I wasn't in a single photo?" She took a sip of her mimosa, her expression unreadable. "You never liked being photographed, Laureen. You always said so." I blinked. That was in middle school. And even then it wasn't true. I just didn't like the way Trista pushed in front of me. Marjorie waved a hand lightly. "You always kept to yourself. I thought you liked it that way." That was the moment it clicked. It wasn't just that they forgot me. They had rewritten me. She turned to go, her heels clicking gently on the hardwood floor. "Don't dwell on this. It's her day." I looked back at the board. There was a photo from our family trip to Big Sur. Trista standing in front of the cliffs with our parents. I'd taken that photo. I remembered the breeze, the salt in the air, the way my dad couldn't figure out how to unlock the camera app. I was standing 5 feet from them. I wasn't behind the camera. I was beside them. And still, she'd edited me out. I walked slowly toward the guestbook table, needing a second to breathe. That's when I saw the decorative family tree. A thick wooden cutout where names were etched on gold leaves, glued in a sprawling pattern. Marjorie and Randall. Trista. Trista's fiancé. A few cousins. Even a second cousin named Austin I hadn't seen in 10 years. No Laureen. I leaned in, searching. Maybe my name was tucked beneath a leaf. Maybe I'd slipped into the glue wrong. But no, there was nothing. The staff had handed me a place card, yes, a seat in the hallway next to the restrooms. But here, on this carefully curated version of our family, I was invisible. No name, no photo, no place. Just a living ghost with a navy dress and a polite smile. Someone behind me whispered, "Oh, that's such a sweet idea," pointing to the tree. I stepped aside, letting them take it in. I didn't want to explain who I was. I didn't want to explain anything. I had never been one for confrontation. But erasure is something else entirely. It tells you not that you're disliked, but that you were never meant to be part of the picture to begin with. And suddenly, it wasn't about seating anymore. It wasn't about color palettes or champagne. They hadn't just given me a bad seat. They'd made it official. I wasn't in the family. Not in pictures, not on paper, not even in the story. I left the display quietly, blending into the swell of people moving toward the ballroom entrance. My dress brushed the wall as I passed, and I focused on breathing, slow, steady, like I could anchor myself to the rhythm. The main hall had shifted from soft sunlight to twilight glamour. The chandeliers overhead now shimmered gold. Waiters moved swiftly between guests offering champagne, crab cakes, and skewers that looked too delicate to eat. The string quartet played something upbeat now, almost joyful. It didn't match how I felt. I kept near the wall, nodding when people brushed past me. A few said hello in passing, more out of politeness than recognition. I was background. Then came the call. "Let's get everyone in for the big family photo." The photographer's voice boomed from near the center of the room, cheerful and commanding. A ripple of excitement moved through the crowd. I didn't plan to join. I figured no one expected me to. But someone, an aunt maybe, tugged lightly at my elbow. "Come on, sweetheart, you should be in this one." I followed, unsure why I did. We were arranged in clusters, people shuffled around like puzzle pieces. The photographer adjusted angles, scooted people closer together. My mother was already in the front row beside Trista, holding her champagne like a prop. I hovered at the edge, waiting to see where I should go. Trista's voice rang out. "Hope Laureen doesn't mind standing way in the back. She always preferred watching from the shadows anyway." A laugh scattered through the group, light, social, almost hesitant, but it landed. I didn't flinch. I smiled. That smile. The one I'd perfected at age 13 when she made fun of my braces in front of her friends. The flash went off. Everyone blinked. The photo was captured. A moment frozen in time. Another one where I was in the room but not really there. As people dispersed, a few guests offered me smiles, soft ones that tried to apologize without words. But no one said anything. Of course they didn't. I turned to head toward the open bar, just to grab something fizzy to hold, but was intercepted by a cousin I barely knew. "You're Laureen, right?" she asked. "You look different than I expected. Trista said you were kind of, I don't know, more artsy?" I forced a nod. "I write." "Oh, right, she mentioned that. Said you're kind of the mysterious one, lives with a cat and a lot of books." Before I could respond, Trista appeared beside her, smiling too brightly. "She's our very own little enigma," she said sweetly. "Single, introverted, very independent, like a Jane Austen character if Jane had an Instagram." More laughter. Even the cousin smiled, not cruelly, just in that awkward social way people do when they're unsure whether it's okay to laugh or not. But they always do. I didn't laugh. I just held my glass a little tighter. I didn't say anything, not because I lacked a comeback, but because I knew it wouldn't matter. You can't argue with a mask, and Trista wore hers flawlessly. To anyone else, she was warm, witty, welcoming. But to me, she was a lighthouse made of mirrors, designed to reflect light and never absorb it. I excused myself and slipped through the side corridor, past a row of manicured floral arrangements and into the nearest restroom, the kind with soft lighting and individually rolled towels. I stood at the sink and stared into the mirror. Hair neat, makeup subtle, dress appropriate, expression gone. I didn't look sad. I didn't look angry. I looked like I wasn't even in the room. The door creaked. Someone entered. I didn't turn. Let them think I needed time to touch up my makeup. In reality, I just needed to exist somewhere that didn't try to reduce me to a prop for someone else's spotlight. I dabbed my lips with tissue, flushed it down the toilet just to make noise, then looked at myself again. They don't need me here, I whispered. They need someone to compare her to. A shadow, a contrast. And the thing about shadows is, they move when the light does. The funny thing about being the family shadow? Eventually, shadows move too. By the time I left the restroom, the light outside the tall ballroom windows had dipped into that warm golden hour glow, casting soft amber across the white table linens and sequined dresses. The room was fuller now, buzzing with that strange cocktail of excitement and polished pretense. I slipped back to the edge of the crowd, letting the ambient music and idle chatter act as cover. Somewhere near the head table, I spotted my dad laughing, gently, awkwardly, at something a man in a bow tie said. My mother was already seated beside Trista, her posture straight, one ankle crossed elegantly over the other, like she belonged in a magazine. Then came the DJ's voice, smooth, rehearsed. All right, everyone, it's time to hear from someone very special to our bride. I froze mid-step. For a flicker of a second, something lifted in me, hope maybe, or just confusion. I adjusted the side of my dress and stood taller, not walking forward but bracing, like a door might finally crack open. Let's welcome Cousin Lance! Applause scattered across the room like polite popcorn. A few guests clapped a beat too long. Lance, who to my knowledge hadn't spoken to Trista since 2019, shuffled up to the mic, visibly sweating under the lights. I stayed exactly where I was, still. He cleared his throat and started with a joke about meeting Trista at a family reunion. One that had to be a lie, because Trista skipped that reunion entirely. The crowd chuckled anyway. I stood there thinking, anyone. They would have handed the mic to anyone, just not to me. Not the sister who lived in the same city, not the one who helped Mom through her hip surgery, not the one who once drove 4 hours in a rainstorm to bring Trista an overnight bag when her flight got canceled. But Lance? Sure, let him speak. The speech ended. Another round of applause. People returned to their seats. I didn't. I made my way to the champagne station, picked up a glass just for the motion of it, then headed toward where Marjorie sat, dabbing the corners of her eyes like something about that moment had moved her. I stood beside her quietly, waiting until she looked up. She didn't. So I spoke. Did you know they were going to have Lance speak? She blinked, looked at me like I'd interrupted a sacred meditation. Well, yes, she said gently. Trista thought it might be more upbeat that way. You're more introspective, honey. This kind of thing, crowds, speeches, it's never really been your strong suit, right? I stared at her, my voice caught somewhere between my chest and my throat. You didn't even ask me. She sipped her champagne. Sweetheart, I didn't think you'd want the pressure. There it was again, the reframing. My silence wasn't their choice, it was my nature. I nodded slowly, not because I agreed, but because there was nothing else to say to someone who's rewritten the story so thoroughly that she thinks it's true. I drifted away, weaving past a table of groomsmen trying too hard to impress each other, past 2 teenage girls snapping selfies against the flower wall. The evening air had cooled now, enough that stepping outside didn't feel like escape. It felt like clarity. Out on the balcony, the sky had faded into pale lavender. The ocean beyond the bluff shimmered in the dying light. I pulled my phone from my clutch and opened my notes app. I started typing without fully knowing where the thought would land. If they're this afraid of what I might say, maybe it's time I said it. I stared at the line, reading it twice, then 3 more times. My fingers hovered over the screen. I didn't send it anywhere. I just saved it. Behind me, the music swelled again. A slow song this time. One of those generic ballads meant to cue emotion without specifics. I leaned on the balcony rail and let the salt air sting my eyes just a little. Not from tears, though it would have been understandable. No, this wasn't sadness anymore. It was the moment after. They'd done everything they could to mute me, but silence doesn't mean surrender. The lights above the terrace glowed like tiny paper moons, strung between wooden beams softened by ivy. I sat alone on one of the benches, the distant murmur of laughter and jazz drifting from the main hall like it belonged to a different world. I hadn't meant to hide. I just needed somewhere my name wasn't a joke and my silence wasn't assigned. The sea air had shifted cooler. I hugged my arms, letting the moment stretch a little longer than it needed to. Out of habit more than purpose, I pulled out my phone and opened my messages. Most were old group threads, notifications I hadn't bothered to clear. Scrolling through them felt like flipping through a yearbook of moments no one remembered I was part of. That's when I saw it. A voice note from Trista, dated 6 months ago. I hadn't opened it when it came. It must have arrived during one of those weekends when I'd convinced myself distance was healthier than engagement. I pressed play. Her voice crackled through the phone, light and casual, like she didn't know she was being recorded. I'm not marrying Darian because I'm in love with him, obviously. I just know how to manage him. He's so easy. Honestly, I could train him blindfolded. There was laughter, not hers, someone else's, maybe a friend. Then a click as the message cut off. I didn't react at first, just stared at the phone like it had betrayed me too. I remembered brushing it off the first time, assuming it had been sent by mistake, meant for someone else. Or maybe I just didn't want to hold one more truth that proved what I'd always suspected. Trista wasn't just cruel to me, she was calculating with everyone. It wasn't just me she pretended around. Footsteps behind me made me turn. Darian. He was alone, phone in hand, clearly stepping out to take a breath. His face was unreadable, not the smooth, polished charm he usually wore, but something quieter. He noticed me, paused, and gave a small smile. Didn't expect to see anyone else out here, he said, sliding his phone into his pocket. You hiding too? I managed a half smile. Something like that. He leaned against the railing, looking out over the darkened lawn. She's different tonight. I didn't answer. Darian exhaled. You think she's changed? I turned to him. You really want to know what I think? His silence was answer enough. I tapped the screen, scrolled to the message, and pressed play. No commentary, no explanation, just Trista's voice, raw and real and cruel. He didn't interrupt. His expression didn't shift much, except for a tiny twitch at the corner of his jaw. When it ended, he looked at me. She said that about me? She didn't know I heard it, I said calmly. Until now, no one had. He let out a dry laugh, one with no humor at all. And she sent that to you? By accident, I said, and I let it slide, because I didn't want to be involved. But you asked. He was quiet for a long time. The kind of quiet people only manage when they're weighing more than just feelings. They're weighing futures. Finally, he said, You know, I always wondered if I was just another accessory in her story. I thought maybe that was just my own insecurity. I didn't speak. I knew too well what it was like to question your own instincts until someone else confirmed them. She's charming, he said. Smart, strategic. But I never thought manipulative. I looked at him. You deserve to know who you're marrying. He nodded slowly, his eyes still fixed on the shadow stretching across the yard. Then he said almost to himself, I need to talk to my mom. It wasn't dramatic. There was no explosion. Just a man adjusting the lens he'd been using to look at his life. He didn't thank me. He didn't owe me that. But he heard me. And for the first time that day, that was enough. I hadn't shouted. I hadn't fought. But I'd been heard. By the time we left the terrace, the air had shifted. Cooler, heavier. The kind of weight that didn't come from weather, but from knowing something irreversible was about to unfold. We didn't talk much on the way to the conference room. Darian was quiet, focused, like someone mentally sorting a drawer they'd avoided for too long. I followed a step behind, no longer trying to blend in or disappear. That part of me had been peeled away. The conference room was tucked behind a hallway near the catering entrance. It wasn't glamorous, no chandeliers or rose walls, just a neutral space meant for logistics and last-minute vendor meetings. But in that moment, it felt like neutral ground, a place where truth didn't need a spotlight to exist. Darian opened the door, let me in first. The room was dim, lit only by overhead cans and the glow from a wall sconce in the corner. A long table sat at the center, perfectly staged with notepads and branded pens. Corporate civility at its finest. She's texting her stylist again, Darian said, voice low. Same person from the last few fittings. She's panicking now. I saw her screen when she left it open for a second. I nodded, just once. She knows something shifted. She knows I did. Before I could reply, the door opened again. Althea stepped in like she'd been summoned to a boardroom she'd once owned. Her gown was sleek, navy with a slight shimmer. Her hair pulled back in a twist so tight it didn't move when she did. In her left hand was a navy envelope, thick, crisp, decisive. She sat at the end of the table, not waiting for us to rise. "We're skipping the niceties," she said. "Let's get to it." Darian didn't sit. He hovered near her, still holding onto the edge of composure. I stayed to the side, more witness than participant, but not invisible. Not this time. Althea slid the envelope open and laid out 2 printed pages on the table. "This came in by accident," she explained, her voice precise. "My assistant rescheduled a styling appointment last week. Trista's stylist sent me their full backup by mistake. Apparently, they upload all client communications to a shared cloud folder. And your sister? She doesn't believe in deleting things." She tapped the paper once. I leaned forward. Darian took the sheets in both hands and read them slowly, eyes scanning every line as if each one chipped away at whatever illusion still stood. 6 months in, I'll have everything. The house, the account access, he won't even notice. Just need to play sweet until he puts my name on the deed. After that, it's mine. He exhaled through his nose, then flipped to the next page. "She's easy to predict. His mom, too. If I say thank you and compliment her hair, she folds like paper. I'll have both of them wrapped by the time this wedding's over." No one spoke for several long seconds. Althea broke the silence. "She planned this like a business deal." Darian didn't look up. "I should have seen it." "No," I said softly. "You were meant not to." He looked over at me then, and I saw something flicker. Rage, hurt, disbelief, but also something steadier, resolve. "I want this to end," he said. "Not tomorrow, tonight." Althea gave a sharp nod. "We'll keep it controlled, legal, strategic." I took a breath. "And honest, if we're doing this, there's no more acting." Althea turned to Darian. "You still want to do this here?" He nodded. "It ends here." We sat there in silence for a beat. It wasn't awkward. It was the sound of all 3 of us choosing clarity over comfort. Althea slid a card from her purse. "My attorney's already here as a guest. I'll have him draft the paperwork." Darian ran a hand through his hair, then looked up. "Let's make this clean." I leaned back, watching both of them, mother and son, suddenly united not by celebration, but by the need to reclaim control over their own lives. Outside the room, I could hear the muffled sounds of music rising again. Toasts being made, glasses clinking, the perfect illusion of a happy night rolling forward. But in here, the truth had taken root, and the wedding would go on, but not the way Trista planned it. The murmurs of the crowd drifted back like waves easing into the shore after a storm. We re-entered the main hall through a discreet service corridor, Althea leading with unmistakable poise, Darian beside her, silent but certain, and me just behind, heart steady for the first time that night. Our footsteps echoed softly against the marble floor, half muted by the music that wrapped around the room like fog. It was just after 8 o'clock. Candles flickered across satin-covered tables, and laughter curled through the air like smoke, rich with wine and false comfort. Guests leaned in close over dessert plates, sleeves rolled up slightly, as if the evening had settled into something relaxed and familiar. They believed naively that the most uncomfortable moments had passed. Trista stood at the front of the room beneath a soft wash of light, her face sculpted into a flawless smile, practiced, polished, campaign-ready. Her hand rested lightly on Darian's arm, not as a partner might hold, but like someone staking a claim. But Althea didn't walk toward the center table, the one adorned with roses and applause. She walked to the microphone. There was no announcement, no spotlight shift. Just her heels clicking against stone and a quiet ripple of attention that spread like chilled water across a too-warm room. Heads turned, casual conversations faded. The room tilted ever so slightly. Trista's smile held for precisely 3 seconds. Then she saw what Althea carried. Not a crystal flute, not a toast card. It was paper, stapled, creased, purposeful. Althea's voice rang out, low but clear, with the tone of someone who didn't need volume to be heard. "Before the next toast," she said, "I'd like to share something. Just a short passage from a message I was forwarded recently." Trista's fingers flexed at her sides. Her mask was still on, but cracked. A pause stretched, long enough for the room to hold its collective breath. Althea read, "6 months in, I'll have everything. The house, the accounts. He won't even see it coming. I just have to play sweet until the deed's in my name." No gasp. Not yet. Just silence. A slow, creeping silence that spread from table to table like ink in water. Trista stiffened. "That's taken completely out of context," she barked too fast. "You don't even understand what that was about." She laughed, a high, strained sound meant to sound casual. It didn't. I stepped forward without thinking, standing beside Althea. Not rehearsed, just right. "You told your friend Darian was a placeholder," I said, my voice steady. "A man with benefits, until the paperwork was done." This time people turned. You could feel it, the collective mood shifting on its axis. Trista let out a brittle chuckle, eyes darting. "Oh, please. She's always been jealous of me. You've all seen it. This is just another sad attempt to hijack something that was never about her." She was unraveling, and fast. But it wasn't my words that broke her. It was Darian. He stepped away from her, silently, no outburst, no dramatic monologue. Just a man holding an engagement ring between his thumb and forefinger like something tainted. He stared at it for a breath, then walked to the table and placed it gently next to the folded napkins. Then he turned and walked away. Stillness followed. Not awkward, not tense, just real. Trista stumbled toward Marjorie like a child caught lying. "Mom, say something, please." Marjorie clutched her purse tight, her knuckles white, her eyes uncertain. She didn't speak. She didn't move. Not for Trista, not for me. Randall shifted beside her, eyes fixed on the floor like the pattern of the carpet held secrets more comforting than what unfolded in front of him. Trista turned again, scanning the room for support. "This is a setup. You think this is real? I did everything right. I planned every moment, every flower, every song. I gave this night everything." "And that's the problem," Althea cut in, voice cold steel wrapped in silk. "You built a spectacle, not a relationship." Trista's voice cracked. "You're destroying my life." I looked at her, not with anger, just a truth long overdue. "No," I said quietly. "You did that yourself. We just stopped pretending not to see it." For a second she stood frozen, lipstick smeared, mascara clinging to the corners of her lashes. The version of her she worked so hard to sculpt now distorted under the light of consequence. Then she screamed, not in pain, not in fear, the kind of scream people hear in dreams where everything falls apart and no one catches you. It ripped through the room, raw and unfiltered, a sound that echoed long after it stopped. But no one rushed to her side. The guests didn't flee, they didn't whisper, they watched. And so did I, as everything she built, brick by brick, collapsed under the truth she thought would stay buried. The air had changed, not the kind of change that follows a new song or a dropped glass, but something deeper, visceral. It slipped beneath skin and into bones, sending a low-level hum of awareness through every body in the room. Something had snapped, and even if people weren't ready to say it out loud, they felt it. You could see it in the way conversations halted mid-sentence, in how every pair of eyes slowly shifted toward the center of the room, like the spotlight knew exactly where to land. Trista stood there, alone beneath the soft golden glow that now felt more like interrogation than celebration. Her chest heaved. Her eyes darted wildly, searching for a lifeline. The smile she'd worn all evening, glossy and curated, had vanished, and what remained was something unrecognizable, panic layered over pride, fury masking humiliation. "This was supposed to be my moment," she yelled, voice cracking like glass under pressure. "My engagement! My future!" Her words didn't echo. They landed, heavy and desperate, falling into a silence thick with discomfort. Then she spun on Darian, rage and disbelief flashing across her face. "And you? How dare you let this happen? In front of everyone?" But Darian didn't meet her with matching fire. He didn't shout, didn't even flinch. His hand calmly dipped into the inside pocket of his suit jacket, and he pulled out a white envelope. Clean, uncreased, ready. Without saying a word, he walked to the nearest table, one still glittering with uneaten desserts and half-empty flutes of rosé, and placed the envelope next to the champagne tower. I already signed it, he said. There it was. Just 4 words, spoken plainly but carrying the weight of finality. The room didn't gasp right away. It took a second, like people needed a moment to process what they'd just heard. Then a gasp. A clink of glass. Somewhere a child began to cry. Not because they understood, but because every adult in the room had suddenly gone quiet, and that kind of silence is terrifying in any language. Althea stepped beside Darian, resting a hand gently on his arm like the punctuation at the end of a sentence already spoken. We're leaving, she said. Then, as if remembering something mildly inconvenient, she turned toward Trista and added, You'll hear from our attorney in the morning. And just like that, they walked away, not hurriedly, not dramatically, with poise, with intent, with dignity. Behind them, chaos tried to find a foothold. Trista stood frozen. Then her hand flew up to her hair, smoothing strands as if reclaiming her reflection could somehow piece the night back together. Her gaze snapped to the crowd, eyes wide, pleading. Mom! She cried out, reaching into the air like a child drowning in a pool of strangers. Tell them I'm not the bad guy here. You always protected me. You always said I deserved the best. Marjorie didn't move. She stood clutching her champagne glass like it was an anchor. Her expression was hollow, confused perhaps, but also something closer to resignation, like a mirror that finally stopped pretending to be a window. Trista's voice broke again. Mom, please, say something. The entire room waited. Then Marjorie spoke, softly, so soft it might have been mistaken for a sigh if not for the words that carried with it years of avoidance. I protected what looked good on paper, she said. I didn't protect what mattered. No explosion, no argument. Just the sharp sting of a truth no one had dared name until now. I stepped forward. Not because I needed to, not to gloat, just because it was time. Each heel tapped against the marble like punctuation. The crowd split in front of me, not with fear, but understanding. Some of them looked away, others stared, but none spoke. Trista faced me like a wounded animal, teeth bared behind trembling lips. Are you proud of yourself? She sneered. Was this your plan? To ruin me? To take everything? I didn't answer her. I turned to Marjorie. You watched her silence me again and again, I said. My voice was level, controlled. And you said nothing. Marjorie blinked back tears. Her shoulders sagged like the weight of decades had finally decided to settle where they belonged. I didn't know how to stop her, she said. I shook my head. No, you just didn't want to mess up the picture. That's when Trista lost it. This is disgusting, she spat. You're just bitter, that's all. Bitter because nobody wanted to hear your sad little story. I met her eyes one last time. No, Trista, I'm not bitter. I'm just not invisible anymore. And I turned away. Not in triumph, not in rage, but in something else entirely, clarity. I walked past the display of framed family photos, the ones that never included me, the ones that always told half a truth with full conviction. I didn't stop to stare this time, because I didn't need to see my face in their version of the story. I had finally found my voice, and it didn't need to be framed to be heard. The crowd didn't erupt. They didn't applaud. They didn't even shift in their chairs. They simply watched, silent witnesses to a moment that didn't require spectacle, just truth. At the door, I paused, not out of hesitation, just a final glance. Marjorie stood with her hand over her mouth. Trista had sunk into a chair, mascara streaking down her cheeks, surrounded by no one. I didn't need their validation. I didn't need their guilt. I just needed to leave, whole. A week later, I woke up to quiet, the kind of quiet that didn't scream of abandonment or emptiness, but of space. Space I had claimed, finally, for myself. The blinds in my San Diego apartment swayed gently with the morning breeze. Outside, the bay shimmered in the early light, a watercolor of pale gold and sea foam. The coffee maker gurgled behind me, filling the kitchen with its slow, familiar rhythm. No notifications blinked on my screen. No calendar reminders. No wedding talk. And no apologies waiting to be accepted. I wrapped my hands around the mug and leaned against the counter. My phone buzzed softly. 7th call this week. Marjorie. I let it go to voicemail. Some silences are empty, but this one, it was full. Full of choice. Full of peace. A new message popped up moments later, the preview line enough to sting and soothe all at once. I know I was wrong. I'm trying to make it right. Dinner? Just you and me. I didn't open it. I didn't delete it either. Instead, I placed the phone face down and said aloud, quiet, just for me. I needed you then. Now I need me. Later that morning, I walked the Marina Trail, one hand tucked in the pocket of my jacket, the other holding a paper bag with 2 croissants. I met Mona at our usual bench, the one with the view of sailboats and dog walkers, and the pier where we once danced on New Year's Eve with plastic flutes of sparkling apple cider. Morning, she grinned. You look taller. I laughed. New shoes, new spine. We talked for a while. About nothing big, about how her upstairs neighbor started jazz guitar at 11 p.m., about a librarian Mona thinks might have a crush on her, about how I still haven't finished that novel I said I'd write 3 years ago. And then I pulled out a photo from my coat pocket. It was old, creased at the corners, color faded to soft browns and greens. One of the few from my childhood that had survived countless moves. Trista in the middle, smiling with all her teeth. Marjorie holding a glass of wine. My father blurry in the background. And me, half cut from the edge. Not because I wasn't there, but because no one made sure I was centered. Mona glanced at it, then at me. You keeping it? I nodded, but not on the fridge. I folded it once, neatly, and slid it into a small silver tin. The kind meant for keepsakes, not grudges. Then I closed the lid. I'm not erasing the past, I said. I'm just not letting it tell me who I am anymore. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. That evening, as the sun lowered itself into the Pacific like a coin dropping into a wishing well, I sat at my desk and booked a flight. One way to Maine. Coastal, quiet, unclaimed. Something I had always wanted, but never given myself permission to do. Until now. I didn't tell anyone. Not even Mona. Just circled the date on a paper calendar I bought last week from a bookstore that smelled like pine and second chances. Back in the mirror, my reflection caught me off guard. Not because I looked different, but because I didn't. Same face, same jawline, same uneven brows. But this time the woman looking back didn't ask if she belonged. She didn't beg to be seen. She was enough. They built a table I didn't belong at, so I built my own. And maybe that's the kind of freedom we don't need permission for. Some things in life don't end with a slam or a scream. Sometimes they end with a quiet walk out of the room, and the decision to never walk back in. If you've ever felt like the forgotten one, the quiet one, the one who always made space for others but never claimed your own, maybe this story feels a little like yours. I used to think being left out meant I had to try harder to fit in. But sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do isn't fighting for a seat. It's building your own table. And if you're standing at the edge of something painful right now, wondering if your silence is strength or surrender, ask yourself this. What would change if you started choosing yourself too? Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever walked away from a situation that didn't honor who you were? Or maybe you're still sitting at that hallway table wondering if you deserve more. Tell me in the comments, what part of this story hit closest to home for you? Drop a 1 if this story spoke to your heart. Tell me where you're watching from. I read every city, every name. And if it didn't quite hit the mark, that's okay too. Tell me why. Tell me what stories you want to hear next. If this video moved you, even just a little, please consider subscribing to this channel. That one click helps me keep telling stories that matter. Stories about us, about healing, about truth. I'm Laureen, and I want to thank you for listening. Because finally, I know my voice is not just mine anymore. It's one of many, growing louder, stronger, together.